When a story ends without answers, it doesn't fade away. It lingers in the quiet spaces, in the conversations whispered behind closed doors, in the questions that no one wants to ask out loud. Valdosta did not move on. The Johnson family could not move on. And as more details emerged, one thing became clear. This was no longer just a tragedy. It was a mystery wrapped in silence. A silence that was about to be challenged. This is Kendrick's Case Part 2. The investigation continues. The Kendrick's families believe Kendrick's death was no longer a tragedy alone. It was becoming a conflict, a fracture line running straight through the heart of a community. The family said murder. The sheriff said accident. The medical examiner disagreed. The school had missing video. The funeral home had missing organs. Nothing aligned. The more the Johnsons looked for clarity, the more the truth seemed to fade. And soon, the case would move beyond Valdosta, beyond Georgia, beyond the walls of a high school gym, into national focus, media scrutiny, rallies, protests, lawsuits, investigations, in a battle that would test the strength of one family against the weight of a system. This was no longer just a mystery, it was becoming a fight for justice. Or perhaps a fight to expose the absence of it. As weeks passed, one truth became clear. Kendrick's family was not going to let their son's story fade quietly. His parents, Jacqueline and Kenneth Johnson, began speaking publicly. To reporters, to neighbors, to anyone who would listen. They spoke with pain, yes, but also with certainty. They believed Kendrick had been killed, and that someone or something was being protected. Local news stations began to cover the story, then state media, then national outlets. Each broadcast carried the same question, spoken or unspoken. Was Kendrick Johnson's death really an accident, or was it something else? Community members organized marches, peaceful rallies, vigils, moments of silence in front of the school, the courthouse, the sheriff's office. They carried candles, photos of Kendrick, signs calling for transparency. The Johnson family was no longer standing alone. Under growing pressure, the case caught the attention of federal investigators. The United States Department of Justice opened a review. The FBI became involved in evidence examination. For the first time, the possibility of reevaluating the case felt real. But progress did not move quickly or smoothly. Questions continued to surface. The surveillance video, why were sections incomplete? The timeline of Kendrick's movements, why were key moments missing? The condition of his body, why did 2 autopsies disagree so significantly? And the handling of his organs. Why had there been so many gaps, so many unexplained procedures, so many missing documents? For the Johnson family, these were not small concerns. They were fractures, gaps, holes in the narrative so wide they felt impossible to ignore. Their grief turned into resolve. Resolve turned into action. Action turned into a movement. The story spread online. Social media reached beyond state lines. Celebrities amplified it. Advocacy groups adopted it. The case of Kendrick Johnson had become more than a local tragedy. It had become a national symbol of unanswered questions, of distrust, and of a family that refused to be silent. But public attention does not guarantee truth, and pressure does not ensure justice. For every person who believed the Johnson family, there were others who believed the official findings were correct, that the tragedy was exactly that, a tragedy. No conspiracy, no cover-up, no crime. And caught between these two worlds was a boy who was no longer here to speak for himself. Grief can be silent, or it can be thunder. For the Johnson family, grief became purpose. They had lost their son, not to illness, not to an accident they could understand, but to a death that felt surrounded by questions. And so they kept asking, kept pressing, kept demanding answers that felt real, answers that felt whole. But unanswered questions can take a toll on sleep, on hope, on a family's ability to keep going day after day. Over time, the Johnsons found themselves standing not just against grief, but against a system they believed was refusing to see what they saw. In 2013, the Johnson family filed a wrongful death lawsuit. They believed their son had been harmed. They believed not enough had been done to uncover the truth. But wrongful death lawsuits are not easy. They demand evidence, documentation, testimony, time, patience, and in this case, they demanded endurance. As the legal process unfolded, something unexpected happened. Some of the claims were dismissed. Some of the cases were closed. No criminal charges were filed. Investigators reiterated that there was no evidence of foul play. But the Johnson family continued to disagree, and their supporters continued to stand with them. What emerged was not resolution, but division. The town became split. Some believed Kendrick's death had been a terrible accident, a tragic coincidence involving a gym mat, gravity, and time. Others believed something darker had taken place, something deliberate, something concealed, and that the truth had been tucked away behind procedure, paperwork, and silence. Neither side was willing to move, and the truth, somewhere in the middle, remained still. The emotional cost was immense. The Johnson family faced years of interviews, courtrooms, public scrutiny, accusations, pressure, and exhaustion. But grief does not clock out. Love does not expire. And a parent's search for answers does not end simply because the world grows tired of hearing the question. There's pain in not knowing. But there is also pain in believing you do know and not being heard. Both of those realities shaped the years that followed. Both of those realities still remain, with pressure mounting and national attention growing. The case of Kendrick Johnson moved beyond Valdosta. It became a matter of federal interest. The United States Department of Justice opened a review of the case. Federal investigators began taking statements, collecting documents, reviewing evidence. Hope flickered, the hope that distance from local familiarity might bring clarity. But federal investigations are not swift. They are deliberate, careful, slow. Months passed, then more. Interviews were given, reports were written, but answers remained out of reach. Eventually, after an extended review, the federal inquiry concluded that there was not enough evidence to pursue criminal charges. No one was arrested. No one was charged. The official ruling of accidental death remained in place. For the Johnson family, this was not closure. It was something else. It was a door closing, but not locked. Not sealed, just shut, still able to be opened if something new were to come to light. And so, the family continued asking, continued protesting, continued holding vigils and speeches and marches. Grief had not softened. It had sharpened. Time passed. But the questions remained. How could a healthy, athletic teenager become trapped in a vertical gym mat? How could so many cameras capture so little? How could one autopsy conclude accident and another conclude blunt force trauma? These questions did not fade. They echoed. Every year since his passing, the community has gathered to remember Kendrick, to speak his name, to honor his memory. Some come in protest. Some come in love. Some come simply to stand witness to acknowledge a young life gone too soon. It is a reminder that grief is not just sorrow. It is devotion. It is love that refuses to be undone by time. Kendrick Johnson was 16 years old. He's a son, a student, a teammate, a young man with dreams. Dreams that never had the chance to unfold. And the weight of those dreams still hangs in the air. Time has moved forward. Years have passed. Students have graduated. The gym has been repainted. The floors have been polished. But inside these walls, the questions have never left. Because there are details, small details that remain difficult to reconcile. How does a student willingly position himself headfirst into a space so narrow that once inside, there's almost no room to breathe and no room at all to turn around? How long could someone remain conscious in that position? Minutes? Seconds? Would there have been noise? Struggle? Calls for help? The gym was not abandoned. Students were nearby. Classes were in session. Yet no one heard anything. The matter of the surveillance video added up. Footage that should show a continuous record of movement, but instead shows pockets of missing time, jumps, gaps, angles that go dark at moments when clarity matters most. The explanation offered is technical, but the impact is deeply human, because when time disappears on camera, so does truth. For Kendrick's family, The absence of certainty is not abstract or academic or procedural. It is a wound that cannot close until the truth is understood, fully, openly, undeniably. But the truth is a strange thing. Sometimes it is loud, sometimes it is unmistakable, and sometimes it whispers, just out of reach, just beyond the frame, just past the edge of what we are allowed to see. And in Kendrick's case, the truth is still there, somewhere, waiting. But to understand what may have happened next, we must look at what came after. The voices, the theories, the evidence that resurfaced, and the shadows that still move in the space where answers should be. Because this story is not finished. As time passed, the case became more than a question of evidence. It became a question of interpretation, of how the same facts can be seen through completely different lenses depending on where one stands and what one believes. Some look at the scene and see tragedy, a miscalculation, a terrible moment in which a young life slipped out of reach before anyone knew to help. Others look at the same scene and see improbability, a sequence of events too precise, too quiet, too contained to accept without doubt. Two truths, one reality, no resolution. Kendrick's classmates, years later, remember more feelings than facts. A sense of confusion, shock, the way grief hung in the hallways like dust in sunlight. Some believed the official account, some did not, but everyone remembers the silence, the quiet that settled over the school after the story broke, the way people spoke in careful tones, the way conversations stopped when certain names were mentioned. Silence speaks, even when no one is talking. There are timelines in this case that have never aligned perfectly, moments where records skip, footage fades, memories blur, paperwork is missing or exists only in partial form. Not enough to claim certainty, not enough to dismiss doubt, just enough to leave a shadow. Time is the quiet witness. It keeps everything, every memory, every secret, every truth, held in place, locked, unchanging. But people change, stories shift, recollections bend beneath pressure, loyalty, fear, pain. Sometimes the truth remains exactly where it always was, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to look at it the right way. Every year, they still gather, not because they have answers, but because they don't. A vigil is not for closure. It is for remembering, for holding space, for what has not yet come to light. Because some stories do not end. They simply pause until the truth is ready to be seen. But there is one more layer to this story, one more thread, one more detail that pulls everything, even tighter, a detail that raises the quiet question. If everything was as simple as it was said to be, why does this case still feel unfinished? Years passed, but the story did not fade. It resurfaced again and again online, in conversations, in quiet moments shared between people who remembered. Some stories do not disappear simply because time continues. They stay suspended waiting for a shift. And in 2021, that shift came. The case was officially reopened by the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office. Old evidence was reviewed. Interviews were revisited. Documents were re-examined. For some, this was hope. For others, concern. For many, a reminder that the story had never settled at all. Investigators stated they were examining more than 1,700 pages of case materials, along with surveillance recordings, witness statements, and forensic analysis reports. A new opportunity to understand, to clarify, to close the space between what was known and what remained in the dark. But clarity did not come easily or quickly, and months later, the result was the same. The sheriff's office announced that their findings had not changed. They maintained that there was no evidence of foul play. The official conclusion remained. Kendrick Johnson's death was ruled accidental. No charges were brought. No new notices were filed. No final statement resolved the contradictions that have lived in this story since the beginning. For Kendrick's family, the fight continues. They have not stopped searching, not stopped asking, not stopped believing that somewhere, somehow, there's a piece of truth still waiting to be found. A truth that has not changed. A truth that has not moved. A truth that has been the same. But there is one question that remains untouched, unquiet, Unresolved, a question that stands at the center of everything. Every report, every autopsy, every vigil, every headline, every quiet moment of remembrance. How does a life full of motion end in complete stillness we no longer see? Morning comes the same way every day in Valdosta. Light spreads across quiet streets. The town stirs awake, but some mornings feel heavier than others, because there are places where the light never fully returns. Places where questions linger in the air, like dust that will not settle. The years have passed, but inside the Johnson home, Kendrick's room remains. Posters on the wall, shoes by the bed, frozen in time, a pause in a story that refuses to move forward. To this family, every unanswered question is a heartbeat, a reminder that truth does not fade with the calendar. It waits. For a mother, the loss of a child is a wound that time cannot reach. For a father, it is an echo that never fades. They still speak his name. They still stand on courthouse steps. They still hold signs that say what words can't. Justice for KJ, the school remains the same. The mats, the floor, the air inside. If you walk through it now, you will hear nothing unusual, nothing loud, just the faint sound of footsteps, the sound of a door closing. And somewhere deep inside that silence, a story still turning over in the dark. The truth is not a secret. It is a puzzle one that waits for all its pieces to return home. Some say those pieces are already there, that the picture is complete. Others say a piece is still missing, the piece that changes everything. And until that piece is found, this case will remain what it has always been, a mirror, reflecting not only one family's loss, but the way a community, a country, and a system handle the unexplainable. Some stories end with justice, and some never end at all.